just to be safe. All right, so, and welcome everybody. It's Tim and I here doing your final lecture for recording tools, and we've come up with what we think is a pretty cool and innovative solution for making sure that we get stereo audio into Zoom. Plus, Tim and I actually get to chat a bit, and it's a little bit more fun than just kind of doing it on your own, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, totally.
So, before we begin here, I've noticed down the bottom you've got a thing that says Beck Ref. Could you let us know what's going on there and sort of what your rationale is behind all of that?
Yeah, basically, so I've got a multi-track here that I mixed for an album a few years ago. It's like acoustic, folky type album, and I just think it's always important when you start to mix a track, especially if you're finding that when especially when you're maybe at the start of mixing, whatever else, as we talk about it a lot in class and in your different modules about referencing tracks. So what I've done here is I've just imported not the full track, but just a little selection of a track by Beck, which is sort of a Grammy award-winning record, really, which I think sounds fantastic. Yeah,
it's a pretty good recording.
Now, I mean, it's not exactly the same. Of course, no two tracks are going to be the same here, but it is sort of a good tool just to kind of like, okay, are my guitars sort of in the same kind of, frequency kind of place and stuff like that. I don't know what you feel about referencing that.
I tend to find one of the things I love about referencing is the it's the center information for me. Like that, to me, usually it's like the kick, bass, snare, vocal, and figuring out how those are stacked. And when I start monoing things out, when I start listening in mono, for example, I really hear how those center things are interacting in the mix track, in the comparison track, sorry. Because sometimes when I center things out, I'm like, oh, I lose perspective because the stereo field obviously sort of disappears and the balance changes a little bit when you move into mono. And obviously you're hearing kind of the combating frequencies, but sometimes it's just great to have that anchor so that, and for me, like, it really comes down to stopping me from overdoing the low end, like, because I get excited about bass.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and also, as we know, it's a good reference, good thing if you find yourself mixing on headphones or mixing on, not a great monitoring system. I know a lot of students are sort of working from home, or especially now maybe gone back home, working from bedrooms and stuff. Having reference material is really important because it will stop you. If you're mixing your track and your bass you think your bass is sounding great, and then you start listening to some reference tracks and the bass is not there or way too much, you've got a really big issue with your kind of monitoring environment. So,
and learning how to listen to a reference track is really important as well for me. I tend to find myself, like, I go for at least 20 seconds when I'm listening to a reference track at any one time because my ears need to adapt.
Yeah, sure.
And then when you switch back, the change is more obvious. I tend to find if I quickly reference in and out, then I do get sort of an idea, but if I really hear the difference once I've let my ears adjust to the reference track.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No, definitely. So so that's what I've got down the bottom here. I don't know if you want to just play a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And the only other thing I would like to sort of point out as well is human ears are great for referencing. So especially when you're in the first year of it. So ears are a comparative thing. They're not right. So when people say use your ears, to me it's like, well, use your ears with an anchor, which is a reference track, so that you have something to compare it to. Otherwise, you're not using your ears. You're just, because your ears aren't just your ears, they're your brain as well, and your brain adapts to what you're listening to really quickly. So if you don't have an anchor, you're not really using your ears, you're just fooling your ears.
Right, yeah, great. Yeah, good point, yeah. So should we... so we've got a reference track down the bottom. I can obviously play a little bit of that as we go through this. Obviously, this track is nothing. I say it's nothing like it. It's in the same kind of genre. It's a folky, quite a light track. It's not something really hard hitting. So Beck just came to mind because he's one of my favourite artists, and obviously his records sound incredible. So I think with reference tracks, it's important that I'm not aiming to get this mix to sound exactly like Beck because it's a different artist, different instrumentation, all those kind of things. But just sort of picking some sonic characteristics of this reference track like you say, Dan, just the kind of how the stuff is laid on top of each other, especially down sort of the center, and having that anchor there. So, it's just sort of to make sure that I'm not going off on a, like you say, on a completely different tangent with it, So using it as a bit of an anchor. Should we talk a little bit about sort of, this session I've brought in here, this is how I got the session. So I've gone back to the original track, and before I even started mixing it, and this is what I received. So this is kind of the, everything's grey and boring looking, and not very easy to decipher where everything is.
It's quite nicely gain staged as well.
It is nicely gain staged. Yeah, the engineer who recorded this has done a great job, and it's there isn't any crazy level thing going on. It was recorded at quite healthy. I think it was all done on analog console, so the levels were sort of the engineer knew what he was doing, should I say, as far as level goes and gain structure goes. But we can talk about gain structure as we kind of go through. But yeah, first thing I would do here is I'd kind of start to color things in. I know it sounds a bit of a kind of like a coloring thing, but it kind of helps me visualize where all my instrumentation stuff is, and sort of separate all the different elements.
I guess we have to have the inevitable debate of what the hell are you coloring drums that color for?
Go on then. What is your default color for drums?
Purple.
Purple. Okay.
Yeah, purple.
Okay. No, mine's red. Mine's red.
All right, cool.
But it doesn't matter.
I'll allow it.
Yeah.
Have you? So
I'm just thinking.
Coloring the audio there.
Yeah, I mean, you can color the audio. I don't think I've got it set in preferences because I just reinstalled Pro Tools, the new version of Pro Tools the other day, and all my preferences are not there yet. You can go in here, obviously, and color the tracks like this. And then what I tend to do is press this button.
The rainbow button?
The rainbow button, which then brings up like that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then you've got these sliders. You can change, obviously, the saturation, how red you want it, just slightly or whatever. I like to have it the full whack because I'm going blind. So I'm getting old.
I'm more of a subtle one personally, but that's I'm really keen to check this out.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is quite useful, and you can tell me I like to have the comments in Pro Tools up, because when I start to shrink the session down, and especially sometimes if some of these track names are quite long-winded, it sometimes can be hard to decipher what they are. So if I put this in, say, kick in, I won't do them all for now, but just for argument's sake, it just means that when I change my view and I go down to micro, I can still see what those tracks are. Sometimes it all gets knocked down to sort of, especially if it's like Guitar 1 SM57 421 room ambient mic or something. This all becomes just gobbledygook, and I have no idea really what's going on.
No, so actually, that's a cool idea. I've never done that with Pro Tools. Yeah,
it's just a little sort of housekeeping type thing, but I find it useful for me. Okay, I'm going to quickly go through and just color the rest of this quickly.
So there is a shortcut there is a setting in Pro Tools where you can color if we go into preferences quickly.
You're talking about how it does the regions for you as well?
Yeah, so that the one that says audio track color down.
It's this one, isn't it? Tracks.
No, it's down on the bottom one. Tracks and MIDI channels, I think. Default color clip coding or something.
Oh, this one, tracks and MIDI channels. Okay.
I think so.
Let's
see if we got that right. I always do it every time I get a new Pro Tools. No, it didn't. Damn it.
I think it's the other one. I think it's the one above it. I've got a feeling if you go into this one and do tracks and that one there.
All right, let's try that.
If I do these guitars and we put these into green. No. Okay.
No. All right, but you can still do it this way, of course. And I agree with you. It has to be the same. They have to be the same color. So that if you're just looking at the audio, you don't have to scroll back to see the track channel or something.
Yeah, exactly.
You just always know where you are.
I don't know. It seems to me that every engineer that I've ever come across uses green for guitars. I don't know.
I use red.
Apart from Dan, every engineer I know, apart from Dan.
No. So my mate Yanto, he uses yellow, I think, because there's lots of different shadings of yellow or blue. I think it's one of them. Whatever has the most shadings.
That's why I thought green was, because green has the most shadings.
Yeah, and that's probably why. And the reason you would shade guitars differently is because, you know, different things like leads and all
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. You want to just make sure that again is right. I'm just double checking that this is actually recording. I just suddenly had a fear. No, we're all good. It's recording. Cool.
Yeah.
I always have that panic attack halfway through.
Cool. I'm just going to delete this. There's nothing on this track. I need that one. I know this is a bit long-winded, guys. I'm just kind of just going through. I'll do quickly, just finish it off. BVs down here.
That's a nice amount of backing vocals you got going on there. I like the look of that.
Yeah.
So see, this is my drum coloring. You're killing me here.
I didn't want to do bright pink for vocals and then a sort of lesser pink for the.
Right. So you see, yellow's my vocal go-to.
And then claps of percussions that are going to go there.
All right.
So very quickly, I mean, you know, I'm trying to do this as quick as I can.
Yeah, of course.
Kind of
I mean,
got one colour there.
These things, and of course, students, these things take a little while, but if you don't do this at the start, you're going to get lost really quickly. And to me, that housekeeping first thing, I think end of last semester, I did like the 4 stages of mixing, and I feel like this kind of, you know, it's like the left brain, right brain thing, like the creative side of the brain versus the logical side of the brain. The more housekeeping you do at the beginning, the less you have to worry about what happens when you want to be creative. You don't want to be creative and halfway through realize you've got to edit something or fix something that you should have done during the housekeeping phase. And to me, that's probably one of the most important things, is like if you haven't set your mix up well and you haven't created everything the way it should be, and you don't have things like, you know, logical naming of all your tracks and all that sort of stuff, what I find incredibly important about that is that once things are clearly labeled, clearly colored, and clearly put together, you don't have to, it's like you can get around your session a hell of a lot quicker.
Yeah. I mean, if you speak to like the, you know, luckily the sort of friends of mine who are, you know, top mix engineers like Tom Helmers and people like that we talked about earlier on, but you know, they all have assistants and they all have a system, and one of their assistants' job is to do all this work. So when Tom comes in the morning and starts mixing, all this housework is done for him in the way that he likes it done, you know, color coded, tracks grouped together. We'll come to grouping in a second about how to group tracks. But doing it all, like you say, absolutely right, Dan. I find that I always do this first before I even start really listening. I haven't even listened to the track yet, almost. It's just sort of getting it into an order where it kind of works. And same with you watching those Mix with the Masters videos, like with Chad Blake. You know, they all have these systems. They all have it sort of done in a certain way. So, you know, I think it makes your job, like you say, when you get into the creative part of mixing, which I think is the fun part, you're not worried about. I'm just sort of repeating what you said, but
you're not having trouble navigating, and you're not. For the worst one for me is it's especially editing. Like if there are drum hits that I should have edited to get in the right place and things like that, I'll be you know, struggling with some compression or some sidechain compression between bass and the kick drum or something like that. And what's actually happening is the kick's out of time.
Yeah.
But then I'm in this sort of creative space where I'm going down these rabbit holes, and what should have happened is my editing should have been done during the housekeeping phase.
Indeed. How do you feel about if you get to mix someone else's track? How much? What's your feeling on going in and sort of timing stuff and everything else? I mean, some engineers will do it. Some engineers will say, no, I only mix what you give me. Like Steve Albini would just say, you know, you've given me the track, I'm mixing what you've given me, kind of thing.
So let's think of this from a recording tools perspective and like a ART perspective, as advanced recording techniques perspective, which is that what we are doing here is creating recordings that are really good to mix, right? And that's really what these subjects were about. That's why we spent so much time in the studio at the beginning, and we would have continued to spend a lot of time in the studio had, you know, the world not ended. But to me, there's a point of pride when I'm tracking something. If the drums are out of time, I'll fix it before I send it to a mix engineer. Because to me, it's just, you know, it's just a point of pride. Now, the question is, at some point, it should be fixed. But it's something that I think if you're a mix engineer, you should be upfront about and say so a lot of mix engineers will send out price lists, and part of that price list is editing. So if you want them to edit, then you have to pay more. And that's a fair thing to say, because editing is not mixing. Editing is early housekeeping stuff. Now, setting up a session like this, you don't have to do that. But I'm pretty sure Michael Brow actually sends out a list of how you're supposed to send the session to him.
Right, I see. Right, yeah.
So even down to this stuff, he goes, right, this is the colors I want. This is how I want it set up. This is how I want you to label things. Which, if you're sending something to Michael Brow, it's kind of a good learning opportunity, actually.
Totally, absolutely.
To see how he sets it up. So I wonder if he takes advantage of that, because realistically, that means, again, the tracking engineer is doing more work. I do feel that there's this slight discrepancy between work where mix engineers do kind of come in like rock stars at the end of it when but good tracks like that. I am sure Tom Elmhurst is amazing, but the recording on that Beck stuff is phenomenal, and he would not have done anywhere near as good a mix. And I guarantee you that the recording engineer worked harder than Tom Elmhurst on this. Just straight up hours. Those would have come through pristine, and Tom Elmhurst would have done his thing, which is an amazing, the way he kind of rides effects and all that sort of thing, and all of his gear and his setup that he's used to mixing. But realistically, what we want is what we're trying to get through to you is to track it like record it, track it like you're going to mix it. Which is you're the engineer. You're the human being who is creating these beautiful sounding recordings that you don't need to mix as much. Mm-hmm. So that when you send it to Tom Elmhurst and things, they go, wow, I really love working with this engineer. I'll recommend them to everyone that I know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's a long-winded response to, do you edit? But look, if it comes through and the drums need to be moved, then freaking move it.
Yeah. I mean, don't be afraid. I mean, we had this conversation last week in our sort of discussion on Wednesday, and Anoop was asking some good questions about, what when you're dealing with clients and whatever else is. And I think there is a sort of line you have to be careful about gridding everything. You get something in and someone, and you realise the kick's, slightly behind the beat or something. You need to be careful there, because you don't want to just time everything to the grid and completely change the track, feel of the track. But like you said, there's a difference between being out of time and just the feel, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, and that comes with training with your ears. But I mean, if any of you remember the Spike Stent discussion, and if any of you don't, there's a London College of Music, the London College of Music YouTube site. I'll put up the link to that interview as well, where he talks about how the first thing he did was cut the vocal into the groove. But he didn't say I cut it into time. He said I cut it into the groove.
Right, yeah.
And he played with it, and he listened to what the groove was. And there's a really great article in How to Say Popular Music about, it's called The Primer on Groove, where they talk about how Led Zeppelin play, how John Bonham's kind of creating the anchor, and how Jimmy Page is pushing the beat, and how John Paul Jones is sitting back on the beat on the bass. And I tend to find vocals sound a lot better when they're kind of sitting back on the beat. So I tend to do quite a lot of vocal editing, actually.
Right.
Because we start with drums, but I tend to do a lot of vocal editing, but I think of it as groove editing, not grid editing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, should we move on a little bit? So, as far as organizational stuff goes, this is very quickly color coded. I mean, I've just gone through it quickly and done my sort of thing. Dan has different color codes. It doesn't really matter. There's no right or wrong when we talk about this. It's just whatever works for you. And what I really want to do is be able to look at this quickly and go, there's my drums, there's my percussion, there's my bass, etc., etc. So again, you can follow this naming thing if you want to. It's just a tip that I use in the comments thing. But again, it's not essential, but I find it's useful when you start shrinking your track, when you've got a really massive session of like 120 audio tracks in it, then this can be a very useful tool just to be able to identify things really quickly. But obviously one of the things of sort of dealing with these drums and guitars and stuff is, I think, grouping tracks together Obviously, grouping stuff together can be helpful in lots of ways. Editing, obviously, in mixing as well. But there's things at this stage in my balance. Obviously, I haven't played any audio through yet. You know, if I do group this stuff together, then I want to make sure that the volume's not grouped together. I think this is something that happens if I create a group here. I'll just show you what I mean. If I press Command G, brings up my grouping. So these tracks are highlighted here for my drums. So these are currently in my group. I can create a group here and call it drums. Okay. But if I go into the attributes part here, well, go to my global, yeah. So global, so not attributes. You can see here what it's going to group together. So the boxes are ticked. This is what it's going to group together. So at the moment, we've got our volume and our mute. And down in the bottom here, we've got record, input, solos, and automation mode. So when starting off, this could be changed. You can amend your groups at any time. I don't really want to group my volumes at the moment because I want to balance my drums. And at the moment, if I have the volume grouped, it means if I turn down my kick drum, I'm turning down the level on all my drums.
I have a tip for that.
Go on, yeah.
If you group them, and then you hit Control, I think it is, and then you can move the volume without moving the group.
Oh,
it disables the group, which is a really handy one I've found. But I keep forgetting to do it. But anyway,
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't actually know that. That's a good thing. Which is it just quickly takes out that particular track from the.
Yeah. It's a really handy one.
Let's put that to the test then.
All right. Let's see if I got it right.
So if we go to this is my group. So if I turn this down without pressing any kind of thing, you can see now when I turn down the kick drum, all my drum faders are turning down.
Yep.
And you're saying if I hold down
Control, I think.
Control. Yes.
There you go.
Fantastic. Ignore everything I've just said. This is a learning experience for me as well.
That's an old one I learned a while ago, but I always forget about it because I don't use Pro Tools as much as you. It's just I always forget that things are already grouped and set, and I always keep forgetting to go down to the group to ungroup it.
Yeah, no, totally. That's a great thing because that's one of the things that really annoys me. I group everything together, and then I go, oh god, I've got to go down here and modify the group and everything else. I didn't know that shortcut, so there you go, learning something new every day. But this is what I would do. So I would set up, percussion. Ooh, go down here. Actually, I'm going to move those claps. Got these claps down the bottom, and I'm going to move them up to the top. Ooh, move these up here. Just so they're with the other percussion stuff at the top here. This will be my percussion. So, I'd go through this and I would group stuff together like my bass, guitars, so that I have a bit more control here over, again, just putting tracks together. Another good way, I don't know if this is the time to talk about it, but once you've got tracks into these groups, another thing that's just useful, let's do a couple more, is VCA masters. I don't know when you do Pro Tools and you do a new track dialogue, you have all these different things. And one of the ones down here that maybe you guys haven't come across too much yet is what we call a VCA master.
A lot of the Logic kids use VCAs, but if you could clarify VCAs for everyone, that would be fantastic.
So VCA masters to me is when I used to work on SSL consoles, you used to have obviously all your channel faders or your monitor faders or mix faders. And if you've ever seen those big consoles, SL consoles, in the center section, there'd normally be a bank of 8 faders under the center section. And what these were what we call VCA masters. They were basically no audio passed through this. It was basically a way of controlling multiple faders. So you could put all your drums, for example, and route them through to VCA1 and then have control of all your drums on one fader in the center section. So it means that when you were mixing, you could, work in the sweet spot all the time and just, solo your drums, But it was not an audio routing thing. It was purely a control routing thing.
Yep. So it doesn't... so it's a good way of like changing your pre-drum faders as well, not on the group.
Right, yeah.
As opposed to turning it up and down on the group, which actually changes the gain staging of things.
Absolutely, yeah. So, for example, and so what Pro Tools have done is they've created. You can see here with the VCA fader that I've done here. There's no audio, there's no I/O, there's no inserts. It's
Mm.
purely a control to control. Now it's saying no group at the moment. So if I put this to my drums, now what I've got control of over is if I solo this VCA, it's going to solo my drum faders here. So this is
Right.
another quick way of, what I tend to do with some of the workflow is I tend to put the VCA for a particular group underneath it, because now
Mm-hmm.
what that's doing is it's splitting up my drums away from my percussion, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I put another VCA, create another VCA here, put it underneath my percussion, call it percussion VCA. You can see now, put it to my percussion group. It's now also visually for me making it a little bit more organized. I can see that this is my drum master, this
Mm-hmm.
is my percussion master, and I would put, I don't know what color I would. I'm sure you've got a suggestion for a color there, Dan, but I would color these all the same as well, maybe just so that again I can just see.
I tend to
You
do
know,
them one darker than whatever we've got there. So
right, so you'd make that like a darker red, for example.
yeah, yeah.
Don't know if there is a darker red. I don't know if there is, but let's. Okay, whatever. Drums VCA. Sometimes I do it like this and just put it like the completely different color. But it's really up to you. And then put this up and make all these like orange or something. It again, workflow depends what you want to do. Just break it up the kind of things. But you can see now. So this is like great because I can now solo. I can now mute all my drums without doing anything, like you say, with the grouping.
See, that is awesome. That's something I don't do. I always use
Right,
like the group solos in the grouping and the
right,
group
yeah,
mutes on the grouping, and then I use the control to deal with individual ones.
yeah,
But this is a new way of working that I don't do because I just do group buses.
right.
But this is you're blowing my mind, man.
Yeah, I mean, I just find this is a good workflow. I learned this workflow from watching an Andrew Sheps kind
Mm.
of video, and he was showing how he uses VCAs to kind of call up thing. And when you start getting into automation and you go into a bit more complex mixing, then
Mm.
obviously this is the master fader. If you think of it like, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a master fader because it's not, hasn't got any audio running through it, but it's sort of like a controlling fader for all these things. So if you want to ride up your drums, in the chorus of a track or something like that, then all you need to do is put this track into automation and do your rides on this one fader,
Mm.
and that does the rides for all these tracks.
That's really cool
So,
because that means, like, say for example, you've got a bus for your drums, and you're putting compression on it. You can actually use the VCA to make the drums hit the compression a bit harder, like almost like a threshold.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that's a good sort of, I think, a good like organizational thing.
Mm.
I don't know if to go into it now because obviously this is I'm a sucker for upgrading to the latest version of everything. I'm on the latest version of Pro Tools, and they've just brought in folder tracks into Pro Tools, which I know Logic have had for years. But you got to imagine that Pro Tools is always behind the curve with these things. But we don't have to talk about that right now. But that's another sort of great way of organization into folders and dealing with that.
Folders I find cool because you can collapse things in and
Yeah.
really, really get around things. But I don't use them in Reaper. I still stick to just buses and tracks.
Yeah, I mean, I don't tend to. Again, it's something that is brand new to me because I'm not a Logic user. I'm more of a Pro Tools user. So I've started to play around with them. What's great about the Pro Tools thing, I'll just show you very, very quickly, just for 5 seconds, is you have two different types of folders. So you have a basic folder. If I show you this one, which is like this, and you just say if I want to put my drums into a drum folder. Put them into there, and now they're in that folder, and that could be my drums folder. If I collapse that folder, then this is just my drums, so on. I can't call it that. I have to call it drums folder probably. Put it F1 next to it, and I can just collapse it. It's basically just an organizational thing, so it takes up less screen space. All my drums are in there. They're still being fed by this VCA outside it, but just saves space. So that's the basic folder. Then the other folder they have in Pro Tools, which is quite cool, is what we call a routing folder. You see the difference between a routing folder is with the basic folder, there is no I/O or inserts available for it. While as this routing folder, this means you can then have all your drums, say, in this folder, but then you can put an insert over all those drums.
So that's more like a bus.
So it's more like a bus, exactly. Yeah. So this is kind of a bit more of a flexible folder, but it's like I say, this is only in the latest version of Pro Tools, which only came out, I think, last week. So something to look forward to if you're not on the latest version, but very useful, and it's going to change, I think, how we sort of using auxiliaries and sub buses and stuff like that.
I guarantee that there's a whole bunch of Reaper and Logic users that are going, I've been doing this for years.
Absolutely, I know. Yeah. Pro Tools is some of these things. You just go, why has it taken like 4 years to get folder tracks into? I think Logic has had it for about 5 years or something like that. I
think Pro Tools just one of the other things about Pro Tools. I think it's one of the best sounding DAWs. But there's a lot of debate as to whether a DAW has a sound. I think the audio playback engine on Pro Tools is really good. Because I actually think it's the audio playback engine, not the way that it sums or anything like that, because they all sum in the same way, but the actual physical audio playback engine, when you multiply that over multiple tracks, Pro Tools just still sounds really open and very clean to me. I tend to find Ableton sounds sort of punchy and super clean and a bit shiny, for want of a better way. I find Reaper sounds a bit rolled off on the high-end frequencies, like smoother on the top end. Harrison is quite punchy and aggressive, I find.
Right.
And Logic, to me, has a bit more of a darker sound than Pro Tools and less open sounding than Pro Tools. A little bit more cluttered as well, I think.
And what do you think? And what do you think causes the different sounds? Just the way it's coded, just the way they did the summing?
No, I don't think it's the summing at all. I think the summing happens in exactly the same way between all of them. I think it's the audio engine and how Pro Tools processes each individual audio track and plays it back, so the playback on each track.
Right, I see. Okay.
And I think Pro Tools is more precise. But I also think that Pro Tools was designed and is still designed to integrate with big studios, so any change they make is always going to be slower because they've got to work it through these massive studios. Because that's where most of their bread and butter still is they're the ones that do all the high-end studios. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a lot better these days because at least with the way they do the subscription model now, you do get updates throughout the year. I don't know if you remember back in the day when it used to be you had to wait like 18 months for the next version of Pro Tools, and then you'd have to pay like £500 to pay for the upgrade.
That's why I left Pro Tools. That's why I moved to Reaper. I just got so sick of that. Yeah.
I'm just going to quit out of my email quickly because I'm just getting, just in case they're coming up in the video there. I don't know if they are.
No, they're not. We're all good. We're all safe.
Just in case.
Anyway, we digress.
They digress.
The danger of these videos
is that we just kind of waffle on. I know. So let's just quickly. So grouping is one way. If you are in the latest version of Pro Tools, then folders is another way of using organizational tools. I've shown you VCAs. Just remember with VCAs, there's no audio going through the VCA. It is purely a controlling sort of master fader for whatever group you allocate to it. So again, another really powerful tool, I think, for sort of soloing. If you just want to check what your percussion sounds like, soloing percussion. I mean, you obviously can solo a percussion group or something, but I think
it's just quicker to hit one thing.
Absolutely. And again, like you say, if you do start getting into automation, then that's, I think, a really effective way of riding up all your percussion at the same time. Let's talk about very quickly then auxiliaries, subgrouping. Should we talk about that quickly?
Yeah, let's get into that. Let's maybe throw these folders out and group those drums into a proper aux. I say a proper aux. Like, let's call it an old man aux.
Yeah, let's just get out. Let's delete this. Delete that fade out. Don't need the folder.
Folder. These newfangled ways of doing things.
Yeah, I know. So the old-fashioned way. So stereo aux inputs. Okay, so we're creating a stereo aux fader, which I think has come down here somewhere. Yeah, right at the bottom. Um,
As far away as possible.
so again, this is a similar. I'm gonna delete this VCA as well, maybe just so I don't get confused and stuff. I'm gonna call this drums subgroup. Now, again, this is sort of probably a similar thing to using the VCA. Apart from what you get from using an auxiliary, is the ability to put inserts on it. So we can create by creating a bus. If I use bus 1 and 2 for now, and rename this. So I'm just going to rename that.
To rename.
Right click to rename. Absolutely. And I call this drums subgroup. And if I highlight all these and go to my output, I should be able to go bus drums subgroup.
Now, did you hold?
I didn't press. No, I didn't.
So it's Shift Option, isn't it?
Yes, I didn't do that. There we go. Sorry, key command failure. So what we've got now is obviously all our drums now routed through this one auxiliary fader. And the advantage of obviously doing this is that we, as well as having a master level control, we have now got the ability to put processing on the output of the whole drum, all our drum tracks together. So this is how, again, another way of using subgrouping to organize your tracks, I guess. You know,
my thinking would be like a VCA before the subgroup and have both. I think that's awesome. Oh, what did you do there?
So one thing I just be aware of is solo isolate. Mm-hmm. So solo isolate, if you hold down the command key and press a solo, you can see it grays out.
Yep.
Just means that if I'm soloing my drum group,
it doesn't automatically mute that.
It doesn't mute that. So if that's not hit, you can see now my drum subgroup. So if I wanted to listen to my drums, can't hear anything because so I'm going to put that into solo isolate. You should hear some drums coming through there.
Got them.
So this means obviously what we've now done is put a kind of subfolder in the way. So we've got our drums going to our drums subgroup, which are then going to our master fader or my monitor. On my Pro Tools setup, it's called monitor output, which is our master output.
Great.
So
if we if you don't mind, maybe, so the other thing, like there's a couple of different DAWs call it something different, which is solo safe. Reaper calls it solo defeat, and this is solo isolate. So if someone says any of those three things, just be aware that there are different terminologies for different things in different DAWs, but the ideas and the routing systems are all pretty similar.
Mm-hmm. We talked about it last week, and we talked about saturation. We talked about some uses of saturation, quite often using some kind of tape saturation on drums, especially if you're dealing with you're trying to go, if it's a kind of a genre of music which is sort of traditional, maybe more sort of folky or rock or something like that, then what we could obviously do with the routing that we've got at the moment is on my insert point here, we could insert some kind of form of tape compression harmonic, or just use a Pro Tools one, it's just the Pro Tools one, like real tape saturation.
Which actually sounds surprisingly good.
Yeah, it's not too bad. Not too bad. I tend to go for more the UAD oxide or something like that. But yeah, these sound pretty good. I mean, I think, does the Plugin Alliance have a tape saturation?
No, they don't. It's the only thing they don't have. They've got a lot of tube saturators and a lot of saturation on all of their mixing consoles.
Right.
So any of their channel strips have little saturation knobs, like a little screw that you can turn up and down.
Right. Yeah.
Which gives you a similar idea. It's like the odd harmonics that tape does? I can't remember. Is it odd or even?
Yeah, it's odd. Odd, and its valves does even. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we're talking about there, kiddies, is the is the difference between transistor distortion versus transistor and output transformer distortion versus tube distortion. They both distort in very different ways. would you mind if we took a little bit of a break now, and then we'll kind of come back a little bit, and what we'll do now is just set up the entire session, get all of that done, rather than spend another 30 minutes chatting to you about it. And then part 1, color organization, VCAs and subgroups, making sure you get all those things sorted. I mean, our preference is not using the folders, but if you like the folders, use the folders. And again, you can do all of this stuff in Logic. We're not DAW specific. We're just showing you Pro Tools because we think it sounds real rad.
Cool.
Awesome.
Okay, see you in part 2 then.
Part 2.
Yeah.